I didn't realize how loudly a room could hum with contempt until my father raised his glass, smiled at my sister, and reminded everyone, again, that I should be grateful I even had a job. That was the night I understood something was deeply, deliberately wrong in my family. And it was also the night everything quietly began to change. Before I go any further, let me say this. If you're listening during the holidays, I hope you're having a peaceful, warm Christmas, surrounded by people who see you, hear you, and value you. And if you're not, if this season feels heavy or lonely, maybe this story will remind you that sometimes the truth takes its time, but it always arrives. My name is Willa Hartley. I'm 33 years old, and in my family, I was never the star. I grew up just outside Seattle, but every visit home meant crossing an invisible border into my parents' real world. A glass and stone mansion on Mercer Island, perched above the water like a monument to certainty and control. Everything there was polished, controlled, perfect. Especially my younger sister, Briar. Briar was the miracle child, the one with the sharp mind, the fast answers, the confidence that seemed baked into her bones. My parents talked about her the way other families talk about legacy. She wasn't just smart, she was destined. And then there was me. I was steady, practical, sweet, but slow. At least, that's how they said it out loud. That night was a celebration for Briar's company. Another anniversary, another victory lap. The dining room glittered with crystal and candlelight. Guests in tailored suits laughed softly over wine that cost more than my monthly groceries. I sat near the end of the table, spine straight, hands folded, already bracing myself. My father, Grant Hartley, stood to give a toast. He always did. Tall, commanding, the kind of man people listened to even before he spoke. "To Briar," he said, lifting his glass. "Another year of brilliance, vision, fearlessness. She has the kind of mind that builds empires." Applause rippled around the table. Then his eyes flicked to me, briefly, almost as an afterthought. "And Willa," he added, smiling thinly, "reminds us all that stability has its place, too. Not everyone is meant to see the big picture." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel in the obvious way. It was worse, polite, educated, knowing. My mother, Celeste, leaned forward, her smile elegant and sharp. "Some people win the IQ lottery," she said lightly. "Others contribute in different ways." I smiled. Of course I did. I always smiled. But inside, I was counting. Every word, every glance, filing them away the way I'd learned to file numbers. Clean, precise, unforgettable. Because this wasn't new. I remembered being 7 years old, crying over math homework while Briar breezed through hers. My father sighing, "We'll need another tutor for Willa." I remembered college acceptance season, consultants, campus tours, a party for Briar's Ivy League letter. And for me? "Community college makes sense," my father said. "Be realistic." I paid my own tuition, worked nights, learned to be quiet. Years later, when I worked as an accountant and tried, just once, to offer a suggestion about a supply issue in my father's timber business, he cut me off without even looking up. "You wouldn't understand, Willa," he said. "This is complicated." That sentence followed me everywhere. So at that dinner, as they celebrated Briar again, as the wine flowed and my presence dissolved into the background, they assumed I was exactly what they had trained me to be: harmless, grateful, invisible. What they never noticed was how closely I watched, how I saw the mechanics beneath the charm, how I listened when they thought I wasn't capable of understanding, how every dismissal taught me something they never intended to teach. They thought I had accepted my place. They were wrong. And as I lifted my glass that night, smiling politely at a future that was never meant for me, I had no idea that somewhere, forgotten, sealed, waiting, there was a single envelope that knew the truth about who I really was. And when it finally found its way back to me, it would change everything. Everett Hartley was the only man in my family who never spoke to me like I was missing something. To everyone else, he was a legend, the founder of Hartley Timber, a self-made patriarch who built an empire from raw land and stubborn will. To the world, he was power and legacy. To me, he was simply Grandpa Everett. When I was 12, I spent an entire summer afternoon in his workshop behind the main house. The place smelled of sawdust, oil, and old wood, warm, steady smells. My parents were at a charity luncheon. Briar was away at a coding camp. It was just him and me. There was an old cuckoo clock on the workbench, its back removed, its tiny brass gears spread out like a puzzle no one wanted to solve. My mother had called it junk, told him to throw it away. Instead, he handed it to me. I sat on the floor for hours, tongue pressed against my lip in concentration, carefully testing each gear, fitting one piece at a time. I didn't rush, I didn't guess. I worked the way I always did, slowly, deliberately, patiently. When the little wooden bird finally popped out and chirped, I startled, then laughed. Grandpa Everett leaned back in his chair, watching me like he'd been waiting for that moment all along. "You see the gears," he said quietly. "Not just the shine." I didn't fully understand what he meant then, but I never forgot the way he looked at me when he said it. Like I was complete, like I didn't need fixing. He died when I was 21. The funeral was enormous. Black cars, business associates, speeches about legacy and vision. My parents cried in public. Breyer stood at my father's side, composed and impressive. I stood a few steps behind them, exactly where I always stood. Afterward, I tried to ask my father about Grampy Everett's will. He waved me off without looking up from his desk. "It's all handled, Willa. Don't worry about it." A week later, my mother found me in the hallway. She held a few papers and a pen, her voice gentle, reassuring. "This is just a formality," she said. "Some old personal items from the cabin. Signing saves legal fees." I hesitated. "What exactly is it?" She smiled, the way she always did when she wanted me to stop asking questions. "Nothing important, sweetheart." So I signed, because I had been trained my entire life to believe that my questions were inconveniences, that trusting them was safer than trusting myself. Years passed. I built a quiet life, a small apartment, a stable job. I stopped expecting anything from my family except distance. Then, one summer afternoon, my parents decided to sell the old house and ask me to help clear out the garage. Boxes of forgotten holidays, rusted tools, dust thick enough to taste. That's when I found it. A small cherrywood box tucked behind a stack of yellowed newspapers. Smooth, heavy, carefully made. Burned into the lid were 2 letters, WH. My hands started to shake before I even opened it. Inside were 2 things, a folded piece of paper and an ivory-colored envelope sealed with dark red wax. I opened the note first. "When they forget you, open this." I felt cold despite the heat. He had known, not if, when. I stared at the envelope for a long time, then I closed the box. I wasn't ready. I took it home, wrapped it carefully, and locked it away in my safe. For years, it stayed there, untouched, waiting, until the night everything snapped into focus. My parents announced, publicly, that they had gifted Breyer $10 million as a second round of funding for her company. $10 million, smiles, applause, pride. A week later was my 33rd birthday. They took me to a nice restaurant. Nothing extravagant. My mother slid a small box across the table. Inside was a $200 gift card. That was it. $10 million for her, $200 for me. Not even an afterthought. An obligation. That night, I went home alone. I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I opened the safe, took out the wooden box, and broke the wax seal with my thumb. The sound was sharp in the quiet apartment. Final. As I pulled the contents free, I realized something with absolute clarity. This wasn't about money. It was about everything they had taken from me by convincing me I never deserved more. And whatever was written on those pages, whatever my grandfather had left behind, it was about to change the balance forever. I sat at my kitchen table long after midnight, the envelope open in front of me, the city outside my window eerily quiet. I read my grandfather's letter once, then again, and then I let my eyes drop to the single document beneath it. I didn't need a law degree to understand what it said. The message was painfully simple. I was the one in control. Everett Hartley hadn't left me encouragement. He hadn't left me sentiment. He had left me responsibility, authority, the final word. According to him, according to this page, I had been the person with deciding power over Hartley Timber since my 30th birthday. 3 years. For 3 years, my father had been running a company he no longer truly controlled. For 3 years, my parents had handed my sister millions from a future that legally wasn't theirs to give. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't laugh. I felt something colder settle into place. The next morning, I met with a quiet, silver-haired advisor who had once worked with my grandfather. I slid the document across the table without a word. He read it carefully, then looked up at me with something like awe. "Yes," he said, "it's valid. And yes, Willa, you're the one who decides." That was all I needed. I didn't rush home to confront anyone. I didn't wave the paper like a weapon. That would have been emotional, messy, satisfying for about 5 seconds. Instead, I did what I'd always done best. I watched. I let my family continue believing their own story. I played my role, the quiet daughter, the one who nodded, the one who smiled politely and spoke only when spoken to. My camouflage. A few weeks later, there was another event. A public one. A celebration honoring Breyer's visionary leadership. The kind of gathering filled with donors, reporters, and people who liked to be seen applauding success. My father took the stage again. He spoke about brilliance, about instinct, about how some people were born to lead and others were meant to support from the sidelines. Then, casually, like an afterthought, he said my name. "Willa has always had a good heart," he said. "Not exactly a sharp one, but steady, dependable." The crowd chuckled softly. I didn't flinch. I lifted my glass. I smiled, and I let the moment imprint itself perfectly in my memory, in my phone, in the record of how easily they diminished me when they thought it cost them nothing. That night, I sent an email. It was short, polite, almost apologetic. "I was organizing some of my grandfather's things," I wrote to the company attorney. "I came across an old document I don't fully understand. Could you tell me if it still matters?" The response wasn't an email, it was a phone call. His voice was tight, controlled panic hiding behind professionalism. "Willa," he said carefully, "where did you get this?" "I found it," I replied gently. "Is it important?" There was a long silence. "If this is authentic," he said slowly, "then everything changes." I didn't press him. I didn't need to. 2 days later, I asked for a family meeting at Hartley Timber's headquarters in Tacoma. I framed it as a question about unfinished matters from Grandpa Everett's estate. Boring, technical, exactly the kind of thing they assumed I'd need help understanding. They arrived together, confident, dismissive. My father stopped short when he saw where I was sitting. At the head of the table. "Willa," he said sharply. "What is this?" I didn't stand. I didn't apologize. "I called this meeting," I said calmly, "because there's been a misunderstanding." He laughed, a short, condescending sound. "There's nothing to misunderstand. You wouldn't understand this kind of thing anyway." That line, again. I met his eyes. I'm the one with decision-making authority here. The room went still. My father's smile vanished. My mother leaned forward, her tone instantly shifting to concern. "Everett was old," she said softly. "He was confused toward the end." I slid the confirmation across the table. No raised voice, no drama, just facts. My father stared at it, color draining from his face. My mother fell silent. Breyer hadn't spoken at all. She was reading, rereading. Then she looked up at me, and I saw it. Recognition, like a chess player realizing the game had ended several moves ago. "You knew," she whispered. I shook my head. I only understood recently. That was the truth, and it was enough. For the first time in my life, no one interrupted me. No one told me I didn't understand. No one laughed. They finally saw me, not as the quiet one, not as the harmless one, but as the person who had been keeping score all along. The announcement went out less than an hour after I left the boardroom. No speeches, no explanations, no family drama folded into the language. Just a clean, controlled statement released through the company's official channels. Hartley Timber announces a leadership transition. Willa Hartley assumes the role of interim CEO and primary decision-maker, effective immediately. That was it. No mention of my father. No mention of Breyer. No accusations. No defense. Silence can be surgical if you know where to cut. Alongside the release was a single photograph I had approved days earlier. I was standing in front of the Hartley Timber logo carved into the lobby wall, holding the old ivory envelope in both hands. No designer suit, no jewelry, just a neutral coat, calm posture, steady eyes. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't angry either. I looked like someone who had finally stepped into the right room. The reaction was immediate. At first, confusion, then curiosity. Then the story rewrote itself faster than I ever could have planned. The quiet daughter, the overlooked one, the one they joked about. Suddenly, people were asking how long I had really been invisible. By midday, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from employees. Former board members, people who had never once looked at me twice at family events, now suddenly remembered my name. Social media did what it always does. It found blood in the water. The spotlight swung hard toward Breyer. The headlines weren't kind. They were fascinated. Self-made CEO or family-funded illusion. $10 million and a forgotten sister. Who really owned the empire? People who had applauded her brilliance only weeks earlier now dissected every interview, every post, every carefully curated story she'd told about herself. Then came the investigation. One article, then another. It didn't need details to be devastating, just enough truth to collapse the image. The $10 million hadn't gone where it was supposed to. It hadn't built innovation. It had built spectacle. Image consultants, private events, a lifestyle designed to look like success rather than sustain it. Sponsors pulled out quietly at first, then loudly. Partners stopped returning calls. By the end of the week, Breyer's social media accounts went dark. All of them. As if erasing herself might undo what the world had seen. She came to my apartment late one night. She looked smaller, stripped of the confidence she'd worn like armor her entire life. "You did this," she said, not accusing, just stating a fact she couldn't escape. "I didn't," I replied. "I stopped pretending." She searched my face for pity, for alliance, for the old hierarchy to snap back into place. It didn't. She left without another word. My parents lasted longer than I expected. They called. Over and over. At first, my father's voice was fury. Accusations, threats. How could I do this to the family name? Then my mother tried something softer. "We're still your parents," she said quietly. "Blood matters." I paused before answering. "Family isn't something you bring up only when you need silence," I said. Then I hung up. A week later, the house on Mercer Island went up for sale. Off-market. Quiet. Efficient. Soon after, I heard they had relocated to a retirement community in Naples, Florida. Far from Seattle, far from the circles that had once praised them. A graceful disappearance, wrapped in polite explanations about health and peace. They never called again. I didn't chase them. I didn't gloat. I didn't correct a single headline. I went to work. I walked into my new office every morning and did the thing they never thought I was capable of doing. I listened. I observed. I fixed what had been ignored. The chaos they left behind settled into something steady, predictable, honest. And in the quiet moments, when the noise finally faded, I understood something that surprised even me. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't triumphant. I was free. For the first time in my life, no one was laughing softly behind my back. No one was cutting me off mid-sentence. No one was deciding how much space I was allowed to take. They had built their world on a version of me that never existed. And when that version collapsed, so did everything that depended on it. I didn't have to say a word. The truth did all the talking for me. I didn't celebrate when I moved into the office. There was no champagne, no victory speech, no moment where I stood at the window and admired the view like I had conquered something. I unlocked the door, walked in, set my bag down, and sat at the desk my father had occupied for decades. It felt strangely neutral, like wearing a coat that didn't belong to me yet, but would. The first weeks were quiet, almost boring. And I loved that. I went through the books line by line, the way I always had. I listened more than I spoke. I met with teams my father had ignored. I asked questions he never had the patience to ask. I didn't chase growth for applause. I fixed what was broken. I reinforced what worked. I chose stability over spectacle. People noticed, not because I announced myself, but because the company began to breathe differently. Meetings grew calmer. Decisions made sense. Employees stopped flinching when they spoke. Slowly, the chaos my family had mistaken for brilliance settled into something sustainable. This was the work I had always been good at. One evening, about a month after everything changed, my assistant told me a visitor was waiting. An older man, quiet. He didn't give a name. When I stepped into the conference room, I recognized him immediately. He had been my grandfather's advisor, the last person Everett Hartley had truly trusted. He stood when he saw me, smiled gently. "You're sitting in the right chair now," he said. Then he handed me a small, unremarkable envelope. Brown paper, soft edges, my name written across the front in handwriting I knew better than my own. "This was left for you," he said, "but only after today." Inside were two things, a photograph and a small audio recorder. The photo stopped my breath. It was me at 12 years old, sitting on the floor of my grandfather's workshop, surrounded by dust and sunlight, hunched over an open clock. My face was pure concentration. No self-consciousness, no doubt, just focus. I remembered that day, 6 hours. No help, no praise, just patience. I pressed play. My grandfather's voice filled the room, steady and warm. "If you're hearing this," he said, "then you did it. You stood where you were meant to stand. I knew you would." He paused as if giving me time to breathe. "The world will tell you this was revenge," he continued. "Your family certainly will, but justice is not vengeance. Justice is balance. And now that the scales are even, you don't need to carry the weight anymore." Another pause. "Let it go, Willa. Not for them, for you. You were never meant to live angry. You were meant to build." I cried then, not because of the company, not because of the money. I cried because someone had seen me clearly, not as potential, not as failure, but as exactly who I was. I didn't share the photo. I didn't release the recording. That inheritance wasn't for the public. It was for me. Weeks later, on a quiet morning, I took the original ivory envelope from my desk drawer, the one that had started everything. I resealed it gently and wrote 2 words across the front: "Case closed." I placed it back where it belonged and walked through the lobby, my footsteps steady on the marble floor. The company hummed around me, alive and grounded. I wasn't the quiet daughter anymore. I was simply myself, and that was enough. If you've listened to this story from beginning to end, I want to thank you, truly. And as Christmas approaches, I hope this season brings you peace, warmth, and people who see you for who you really are. I'd love to know how you're spending Christmas this year. Are you celebrating with family, friends, or quietly on your own? Let me know in the comments. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories from women who found their voices after being overlooked for far too long. Wishing you a gentle, joyful Christmas, wherever you are and whoever you're with.